Cricket media used to be pretty simple. Find your favourite newspaper, head to Cricinfo, and maybe a blog you like. Now just finding the best stories and writing is a huge challenge. You already have a job. You just want to read about cricket. Well, that is what the best of cricket is currently doing. They go out daily to find the newest cricket coverage and the best stories from any publication in the world. And when they can't discover what they want, they also hire some of the best writers to produce their own great stories. You can get the best of cricket via their website or on WhatsApp. They find cricket's best stories and give them to you every day. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Scoreboard. I wonder what it would take for India to work out what they have to do with Travis Head. There's a certain point, isn't there, in cricket where it's quite weird, where you have a situation where the longer you bowl to someone, the more you should understand them. And yet so many times in our game, it seems to go the other way. Just bowling to Travis Head seems to make India more confused, not less confused, of what to do to him. And then at the other end, Steve Smith, who for about 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, I don't know, it was a long time, was batting like a Steve Smith impersonator in some sort of one-person stage show, where he was trying to do everything that Steve Smith did, but in a slightly cartoonish way. And India were just waiting for him to go out, and waiting for him to go out, and waiting for him to go out. And then afterwards, the real Steve Smith, a bit like that Timothée Chalamet thing, turned up. Right. And then suddenly, things completely change. And that is India's day, right? Not knowing what to do with Travis Head, not taking Steve Smith early on, and it just going completely and utterly out of control. Perhaps the best thing for India at the moment is that day one was already a bit of a wipe off. We might have one or at least half a day from here on in also that we will be wiped out. From here on in, and so that India can sort of cling to this position. But there's plenty of chances for them to still make runs on this wicket. This, what I'm going to call a very new ball kind of wicket. If you've got any comments, please put them in the chat. If you are desperate for me to answer your question, don't spam. Don't ever spam. If I see you spamming, you're just kicked. But you can also do super chats if you really need me to answer anything. But let us get on with the main part of the Scoreboard. All right. Let's start with the runs per over today. I was wondering at times in that first session how much Australia were struggling to score. And I thought India bowled some very good deliveries all the way through that first session. But I was wondering how much they were just thinking to themselves that this is a new ball wicket. So it took me a lot longer to work it out, perhaps, than they did. I'd have to go back through all the data at Brisbane of recent times, or whether this was just that kind of wicket that they read. But in the end, they played an absolute blinder in just surviving that incredibly long, was it like a 9-hour-long first session? Brisbane with the extra time at the start of the day's play. So many times working in Brisbane, I have struggled. It's the only ground in the world I think I struggled to get to the start of the day's play for. So I think they did very, very well in that session, but it was probably, I still would have been happy to be India from there on in. 3 wickets, going at 2.5 runs and over, controlling the game. And then that second session just spiraled, didn't it? It was bad enough that Head was putting pressure on them, but at the point at which Steve Smith just started thinking to himself, well, I can pretty much do whatever I want against Jadeja and a little bit against Akash and also Siraj. That was kind of it. And that's in a low scoring series, to not lose a wicket and to score it almost 5 runs and over. There was a couple of times where I was like, have I turned on a test match from Australia in 2012? It just felt so different. And then of course they kicked on again. It was interesting that I think they decided that if they took down India with their second new ball, that they'd be looking at 650 type score. It was doing a little bit more at that stage, and they did get penalised, but Carey got back on top. They've still got Stark out there. They've still got a chance of adding some runs the next day. So just huge, but just a huge swing really. Of 3 wickets at 2.5 runs, no wickets at 4.8, and then losing wickets at 5.5 runs and over. It's a very big source. I think that tells you that we talked about it during the Morning Glory. It was really interesting, actually, talking to people. There were people who were saying there was stuff in the wicket. There was people who were saying it was really flat and everything else. I do think them shaving the pitch here a little bit more than they have been at recent times certainly played a part in this, on top of the fact that India don't know how to bowl to head, and we saw Steve Smith roll back the years. He doesn't feel that old, Steve Smith, does he? But what's his form like? I don't know. We'll just have to check this Smith formometer. Apologies to DMVR Nuggets podcast and also our own Virat Kohli one. His form looks identical to where Virat Kohli's form ended up. I think if we find, but probably if we started the day's play, there was a big period of time where it was more down here, wasn't it? Maybe this is the best way of actually showing his form, this slow roll all the way around, because it did take a long time for Steve Smith to actually find his form. They put a wagon wheel up early, and I think there was a 2 here. There was a bunch of singles in here, and there was a couple of balls here. It was pretty much here. At that stage, he was running across the crease. As I said, like a caricature of Steve Smith rather than just anything else. Running across the crease and turning the ball to leg. Looked like he was going to miss one at any stage. There was, one where Akash Deep, where I just thought he was plumb LBW, and there was a little bit of inside edge on it. There's the other one from Siraj. There was some leaves and everything. It did not look good at all. And then towards the end of the day, he's actually ended up, I think he scored more runs in this region than he did here. That's kind of what you want a Steve Smith innings to be. Is you want him to be turning the ball to the leg side, getting himself off strike early on, which I remember before he looked like he was Steve Smith on wheels, and he was, I want to say 38 off 70 at that stage, and he was still spluttering for him. But I remember thinking, and even earlier than this at times, the one thing I thought he was doing well was that ability to get off strike. And I wonder now, and I've written about this before, of course, about how, the Fab Four are so interesting in that they all get off strike in different ways, and they all defend/attack in different ways. And I wonder, watching this innings, whether a lot of Smith's recent problems have been just the inability to get off strike. And if you can keep him on strike for a long time, eventually he will miss the straight one. But it's very hard for a bowler to bowl that sort of exaggerated straight line to him and not without sort of getting their radar right. Do you know what I mean? Maybe, that was it Dale Steyn who used to say, this was one of the South African bowlers used to say, I start 8 inches outside off stump, 6 inches, 4 inches, trying to bring it back and back and back. And I think a similar thing you could be said with Steve Smith, whereas if the first time you bowl the ball is hitting the top of middle and leg, or even going slightly over the top of middle and leg, if he could get off strike, that means the next time you're there, you might actually bowl, too far down the leg side, which gives him an easier hit to be able to get away with. It's an interesting one. Either way, it's very, despite the fact he did struggle for a long time, once he got going, it really was something quite special. So you can see in here, first session, not rotating the strike as much, and that just goes up. And then by the end, he was obviously just playing. I mean, at times he was going shot for shot with Travis Head. It was remarkable, the sort of the turnaround that we saw within this innings. He does like batting with Travis Head, and I also thought about this a little bit. If you're bowling to Marnus, obviously he's made a lot of runs with Marnus. There's no issue with that as well. But if you're bowling to Marnus, the actual line and length is slightly different, but you're still bowling to, a right-hander who is also moving slightly across their stumps. If you're bowling to Mitch Marsh, you're bowling to, a bloke about a foot taller than Steve Smith. A completely different kind of batter coming down the wicket at you with his front leg and everything else. And with Travis Head, you're bowling to a left-hander, also a left-hander who bats really deep in his crease, someone who is, that you have to be quite accurate with. Just wondered if there's something to be said for, again, that helping Steve Smith. They seem to have, this really good partnership, the two of them together. It might also be, if we're being really, really brutally honest, that both of them are very good at batting in the first innings. And so they're both specialists in the first innings in Test match cricket, and that's why their partnership looks better. But I just wondered if there's something to do with the two divergent styles, and especially how it would help Smith, because I feel like Smith is someone who just needs you to be, 5 or 10% off, and it's very hard to keep any pressure on him at all. And I suppose Head is as well, actually. Anyway, let's get on to Travis Head. So I think the orange lines here are quite interesting with Travis Head. You can pretty much see, I remember me and Nathan Lehman talked about this once years ago when we did I think it was an article. I can't remember if Cricinfo put it out as a podcast as well. Yeah, it must have just been an article, actually. Sometimes what you could see from wagon wheels is where the fielders are not, and sometimes you can see where the fielders are, right? So you can see here that they did have a fielder around square leg quite a bit. But they also had, obviously, a deep backward square out, and they had a fine leg out, right? For a lot of that period, they had fielders out here. Here is this big gap that teams are leaving for Travis Head because of how strong he is here, right? I still think he's still going to get his runs and his boundaries in this area anyway, even with those fielders out, right? Some of these might be from Jadeja. So he didn't always have a fielder out from Jadeja. If you allow him to be able to play in these two places, I almost think that having a fielder up at backward, just a slightly backward square leg with a fine leg, and having the pointer up, what you are stopping is the ability for Travis Head to just play the shot as he wants to play it. India seem to have got themselves into that position that so many teams used to with Adam Gilchrist. Harry Brook is another one, Rishabh Pant, and they get their minds set on trying to stop the destruction. In Travis Head's case, he's such a good limited overs cricketer, probably better than all of those players, including Gilchrist, at just knocking balls around for singles. And so once you put all these fielders out, essentially what he does then is he just milks that and takes it. I don't think you want to see a top-class international player with, 1, 2, 3, let's say 4 boundaries and all these singles. Like, for me, he should be hitting 5, 6, 7, 8 boundaries before you are really committing to that, unless he hits like 2 or 3 in an over, right? You shouldn't be doing for all bowlers. You shouldn't be doing it automatically. And I always felt this was sort of that, especially that early Gilchrist career, where teams would just put the fielders out before he had played the risky shot. I understand that a player like Head is so used to hitting boundaries and everything else, but he's also very, very good at scoring quickly, even with the fielders out, right? So if you look at this, as I said, there's a 1-4 here, 1-4 here, 1-4 here, and 1-4 here. So even with that fielder out, he still has the ability to pepper that boundary a little bit. I would rather him hitting the 4s and then putting the fielder out, because I think this is too easy for him to get off strike. And there were so many times today where I felt that they had some pressure on him, and he did play and miss a bit. And then suddenly he would just drop the ball to point and take off. I don't think you can allow that. And again, you want to be able to tuck him up around that sort of, maybe 4th stump line. What did we say the other day? Maybe 3rd or 4th bail height, maybe even 5th bail height, that sort of section. If he can get inside that and drop that to backward square and just take a single down to the fielder there, don't you want him to hit more balls, especially in this area from straight? It's different if these are pull shots, right? I don't think I don't think you mind him flicking the ball across the line, that pickup shot that he plays in limited overs cricket. I just think there's too many places here where it's obvious looking at this that they have put a fielder out early rather than make him earn it. And I'm still not sure he's a particularly great starter in Test cricket. And he was playing and missing, and it was tough when he came out to bat. it just feels a little bit too easy. And the other issue is because he's so powerful, he still has the ability to get the ball around you. I don't know. There was something a bit off about it again. And as I said, I've seen many teams do this before to these kinds of players. Say Wag, you could throw him in there as well. This is Travis Head's strike rates by each bowler in the series so far. Obviously, he really liked Rana. He's scoring it over a runnable against Siraj. Siraj doesn't seem to have a good way of just bowling dry against him at all at the moment, and he slides on. Not Nitesh's fault. Nitesh bowled a really good ball at one stage today, top of off stump, and I was thinking to myself, that's the kind of ball I want to see more of, as Travis Head just drove it back down the ground. Like, you've got to handle that. What's interesting is that he's still scoring at a very good rate against Bumrah, and I think this is the most interesting part of this. Obviously, only faced Akash in this test match, but a strike rate of 85 against Bumrah is really high. It's 80 against Jadeja, it's 70 against Ashwin, and 62 against Washington. I think they felt that 70 against Ashwin probably wasn't worth going with Ashwin. I think with the extra bounce today, I would have liked to have seen Ashwin bowling at Head on this particular wicket. I might have even liked to see him bowling against Smith on this wicket. I'd like to see him bowling against Lyon. I'd like to see him bowl. We'll come to Jadeja later. I think there's something quite interesting to be looked at with Jadeja at the moment. But I just think on this particular wicket, you just wanted a taller spinner. I understand them wanting and needing extra batting and where they are. But I didn't think... I thought when Head was going against Ashwin, there was an element of kill or be killed. And I felt when he was batting against Jadeja, he felt a lot more comfortable. That said, Jadeja almost got him to, bring one back onto his stumps and everything. So I'm not saying it's the end of the world there. Why not? Well, let's do some more Bumrah stuff here. Bumrah, Indian Pacers with a minimum of 20 wickets in Australia. So it's mostly modern guys. We've got Srinath. I think it was a fantastic bowler. I can't believe there's this match factor 50. Don't think it's match factor. And then you've got Carson Gavri and you've got Kapil Dev. So you've got three older ones. Everyone else is fairly new, right? Siraj is right up here, still averaging under 30. You've got Mohammad Shami just over 30. And then you've got that other sort of, early 2000s, mid 2000s guys in here. Bumrah at 18.1. Ridiculous. I thought he bowled well today, but I also thought Akashdeep bowled really well today. It just didn't really happen for him. This is wickets for India in this series so far. He has basically half of India's wickets. And from the start, we've been saying the same thing, is it Bumrah or bust? At the moment, it has become Bumrah or bust. But Siraj today, I thought he had very good rhythm. I like the way the energy was getting on the ball. I like the way he was aggressive. He just wasn't able to do it consistently all the way through. Akashdeep, I thought, bowled really well today. This is one of those days where I look at the scorecard and I think it's easier to sort of hone in on this. But I thought Akashdeep bowled very good spells today and just didn't get a wicket. But, it's feeling more and more like Bumrah or bust. And just on Siraj, I think this is from the first session. So maybe this is about 35 overs in or whatever. You can see that majority of Siraj's balls are in this section here, 30%. So 9% hitting the stumps that are full. What's interesting with these two numbers, and this is the thing that I thought was quite interesting, is that he's willing to pitch the ball up when it's outside off stump, but not when it's on the stumps. That could be planned. You got to remember that, I think Crunk asked a question about this yesterday, and we were sort of talking about these sorts of things. There is an element of he's bowled 44% of his balls out here. He should bowl more at the stumps. McSweeney was someone that they were trying to bowl outside the stumps to. Manus was someone they were trying to bowl outside the stumps to as well, right? So there was certainly an element of them purposely bowling outside the stumps at times. But this is kind of what I would call the Siraj magic zone. And I do wonder in this series overall if he just hasn't been there as much as when he is at his best. I think because of the angle and the exaggerated seam movement and everything else he gets, his ability to sort of keep the stumps in play, but also be at that awkward sort of height and angle is really important for him. But he still bowled 30% of his balls in the area that he more or less wants to be hitting consistently. I don't think this is terrible, even if he wasn't consistent. But this goes back to the Siraj versus Head section. So obviously the last one we just showed you was right-handers. This is left-handers. This is strike rate. This is that same area. And this is when he comes on the stumps. I think he can be fuller and straighter. I think this is, they might not have bowled a lot of balls and everything else. But I do think that essentially, I'm trying to see where the stumps finish here. They finish there. I think the magic sort of area to head is about here. And I think that Bumrah can bowl it quite naturally. It's probably almost where he wants to bowl to left-handers. But I think Siraj could do it as well. I just wonder if he can do it as consistently enough. But we see this with Head so much as everywhere else, it just goes for runs. This is quite interesting out here. And this is the one I would like to see a lot more information on of why that is happening. Is it possible that they can bowl fuller to Head outside of stump? Because he's still going to try and carve it away. He's still going to try and drive it on the up and everything else. But I found this really interesting. Now, I just did a podcast with Saurabh Samani over on TalkSport, and he was talking about how Jadeja had been struggling with his economy rate in this game, or this innings. And I thought, haven't I done something on that before? So I quickly got Cheyenne to go and have a look at this. So in 2022, he only played 3 games, and his economy is 3.08. There is no other time in his career where his economy has been over, what's that one? Yeah, 2.8. All right, so 2.82, 2.83. Last year, his economy was 2.39. It's a run and over more. Part of this is because everyone is scoring quicker, right? With this, let's not be stupid here. It is as simple as that some ways. Everywhere in cricket is scoring a lot quicker. Does feel to me, though, that there is a pattern a little bit to Jadeja as well. And I remember seeing this with someone like Brad Hogg when he was getting older in T20 cricket, where some of the shots that players wouldn't play to you before start to get played a little bit more when you're an aging spinner, and it means that you can't keep the pressure on as much. I don't think this is terminal, because I do think a lot of it is just, Ollie Pope and Ben Duckett related, and New Zealand scored quite quickly in their series, and India struggled there. And, he was bowling to Head, who's a left-hander and stuff today. But Smith also I think Smith driving in through the covers so comfortably just felt to me that there was something there. This is just worth watching, because part of the reason that India probably brought him in was the fact that he can control the run rate a little bit, and that didn't happen today, and it's not been happening for a while. And the other one is McSweeney, talking about economy rates and strike rates. I'm obsessed today. I remember last night going to bed and thinking to myself, I wonder what McSweeney's strike rate is in first-class cricket. It's the kind of things that Jared Kimber thinks about before he goes to sleep. Because the reason that this was interesting to me at the time was because I suddenly thought to myself, I don't know how he's going to score consistently in Test cricket. And I assumed that his strike rate was probably going to be 45, 50, 55, right? Like within the range of normal. I think for a player of his age and talent, 41.9 is really low. We know he's a player in development, and you would probably have to go through his strike rate every year, because his overall record isn't great, because he has the, whatever it was, 4 or 5 bad years at the start, and then the 2 good years as he starts to, sort of hit not peak batting age, but sort of maturing batting age, right? Like I think there's an element of that there. But why I was thinking about this is I was wondering beforehand if he's one of those players who you ask them to open, and in their heads they think to themselves, okay, I've got to be quite defensive and bat like an opener, and they kind of change how they bat, and so they struggle to score a little bit more. Then I wonder, and then And then I woke up and we checked this, and I saw his strike rate in first class cricket. And I did think to myself, that's an exceptionally low first class strike rate for someone who you think is test quality, right? So I don't know. If we look at someone like BJ Watling, I don't know why he's the one that comes. I do know why, actually. He's the one that comes to my mind. So BJ Watling was someone who probably should have batted in the middle order. Starts his career as an opener as well, if I remember correctly. And I just want to look at what his first class strike rate is when he wasn't playing in the test side. Okay, so when he plays for Northern Districts, so his strike rate is 46, right? And then when he plays for New Zealand, that drops to whatever it was for in test level, right? And so you've got someone who was starting from a slow base, sort of slow to normal base, and then Test cricket went down to 42. Right. My worry about McSweeney at the moment is we know he can play that sort of pull shot, but it looks a little bit like a tough shot for him to be able to handle consistently in Test cricket. And so you look at the way he bats, and I'm not sure he has scoring options for Test cricket. I think he sees the ball fine. I think he moves into place. He's got a bit of an issue, obviously, with Jasprit Bumrah, but that's fine. That's a normal human thing to have. You know, this is a bit like when a left-hander will make their debut against AUSvIND. There's a certain point where you kind of have to park that a little bit, right? But what I'm looking at is the overall big picture of him now, of if he's going to strike in first-class cricket at 41, that means in Test cricket, we're looking at 38, 37, 36. To be able to do that, you need to be a Craig Brathwaite, BJ Watling, who's the other one? You know, just a Dom Sibley like level defensive batter, and I haven't seen that with McSweeney at the moment. So I haven't seen how he's going to score at Test level, and I also haven't seen him with the ability to put any pressure back on. So I think there's an element. So Crunks just said McSweeney is just getting Bumrah, but he's not, is he? Because what I'm talking about is happening in first-class cricket, and it's happening in Test cricket. He doesn't have natural scoring areas where, you know, he doesn't have that ability like the very top players to be able to deflect the ball and get off strike. So he's getting stuck on strike for long periods of time. And players who get stuck in first-class cricket, you can get away with that because eventually you get loose balls. In Test cricket, especially in this era, you don't get a lot of loose balls bowled to you anymore. You know, bowlers don't bowl poor balls. There aren't short, wide ones like there were in the 80s and 90s, right? Bowlers don't overpitch looking for swing in the way that they used to and everything else. The wobble ball means that the vast majority of the balls are on target. And because fast bowlers have spent a lot of time with white ball cricket, you know, they don't bowl as loose as they used to. So you can still be a top-level defensive player, Pujara and Watling and Brathwaite and Sibley, but your defense has to be absolutely world-class elite. And I wrote a piece about Sam Robson a few years ago when he made his 100, and I was like, I think the problem with Robson is that he's not going to be able to score when the ball is just put in the right area over and over again, which means that the best bowlers in the world are going to be able to consistently bowl at him. And I don't think his defense is of that level. Whereas with Watling, I kind of said the opposite, where I was like, his defense is so strong that it's okay. You know, Sibley couldn't play any shots, but his defense was so strong that he actually still stayed in for a long period of time. That's my issue with McSweeney at the moment. Some of this might disappear when he's not opening. Some of this might disappear when he's not facing Bumrah. But the major issue is that I don't see a path to him scoring naturally at Test level. And so he's going to slow down even further. And when you're playing out of position and you're already doing a different role, all these things play a part. It's a really interesting one to look at as he goes ahead anyway. And just to show how good he's been, because a lot of people have been looking at his batting average of 37. So this is his match factor in the Sheffield Shield since 2022. So basically, since he's got good in the games that he's played, he's been 60% better than the other players. So Carey's obviously been phenomenal in Shield cricket, and he's back in form as we saw again today. Inglis probably would be playing if they had a position available for him, and obviously him and Carey don't particularly work there. Webster kind of got put in ahead of Hardy, and they absolutely love Hardy. You'd see here the other specialist batters are behind McSweeney. So that's not saying he can't bat, because I don't think that's the case. But I do wonder what his scoring avenues are in Test cricket, and if his defense is strong enough. Best of cricket, of course, today they've got their cartoons up there as well. And we can see there've been half-assed internet research. Some of those things that they do over there on that is actually quite good. Some really interesting stuff. The sort of stuff that actually we do on Good Areas. So it's worth going over there and having a look at what as well. bestofcricket.substack.com. All right, that's us done for the scoreboard part of the show. We will now go to the questions from the room. So I'm going to take a quick break here and come back with your questions. We've got a couple of super chats as well, but any other questions we can find, we'll hit them up as well.
NVPlay helped me make this content. For detailed performance breakdowns of your game using technology and data, contact them today.
Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a six from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend. All right, welcome back. I got a couple of questions here that we can go through, but feel free to put any others in. And we've got a couple of super chats, of course. Let's start with them as well. All right. Sanjeet says, why does it come up? StreamYard has so many issues at the moment. Hence the mute episode the other day. That was weird. Sanjeet says, why don't India try to bodyline trap for a few overs? I bet Pat would do that if he was facing someone like Head. By the way, nice sweater. Thank you. They did. They went for the short pitch bowling. It's actually... he hit a couple over third, didn't he? And then they had the four fielders out. So they had deep backward point, third, fine leg, deep square. And then they had the sort of the catching sort of Neil Wagner fielders on the leg side as well. Didn't particularly work. I don't know if they have a particularly good bowling lineup for that. Ishant Sharma, Harshit Rana, Prashid Krishna are probably guys, you know, in the previous generation or this generation that might be better suited for it. I don't think it's Bumrah's main strength to come in and bowl bounces. Also, you know, there's a duty of care element perhaps with Bumrah. With Siraj, he's, you know, he probably doesn't get, you kind of want that kind of bowler. It's not that Siraj can't do it, but I don't think it's the best way to use him. And then Akashdeep, I mean, you can try it with Akashdeep. You could do it with Nitesh Reddy, honestly. There's, you know, the sort of Craig McMillan, you know, he's a better Craig McMillan than Craig McMillan ever was. So I think, you know, there are ways to be able to do it that way. It's not particularly easy. You say, I bet Pat would do that if he was facing someone like it. Pat Cummins would do that, but Pat Cummins is the bowler that is more suited to that and has done it a lot and has been really successful at it. So when you're asking a question like that, you have to ask why Pat Cummins would do that. But they tried it. It didn't work. I think they tried it. If you were on the Morning Glory show, I said, I think they'll probably try and get them out naturally for 25 minutes and then they'll go to Jadeja and bouncers. I didn't check the time, but it felt about 25 minutes to 40 minutes period where they changed and they tried both of those tactics. You know, they were perfectly reasonable. I think that the way I would look at it, they might not want to do this just because it has follow-on effects if it doesn't work. I think you have to keep the field up to Travis Head, keep attacking him, wait for the outside edge to be hopefully caught or the inside edge to be dragged back onto the stumps. When that does not work, I think you can instantly pivot to the bouncer. I don't think it's as useful if you do it later on. It's not specifically that he's weak against a short ball, but I think if you bowled it to him earlier on before his eye is set, he's certainly going to hit some in the air. And at this stage, I think India should be risking wickets with him a lot more, because trying to bowl defensive hasn't worked for them at all. It's really interesting. The amount of times I watch them bowling to him, and I think they're kind of just bowling for caught behind. Very hard to get a player out kind of one dismissal, like in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, they're not trying to get him bowled. They're not trying to get him LBW. The slips are already out. They don't have catches around. They don't have like 2 or 3 catches. Because there is, to go back to the scoreboard, there's another element that they could try, which is you want to put deep point out. All right, put deep point out. Take the slips out. Maybe keep 1 slip at second or third. But take the slips out and put 2 catches on either side of the deep point fielder. Right? So have like a catching point, which, to be fair, could be killed by Travis Head, and a sort of a slightly, maybe a gully type fielder, 1 on either side, and just angle the ball across him and just say, okay, or even cramp him up, because you might be able, he's going to give himself room anyway. Keep square leg up and plug that ball maybe bail height just outside off stump, a foot outside of stump. He's going to try and carve it away anyway. So there's a couple of things like that they could look at as well. Sanjay says, added to the antics, do you see similarity between Siraj and Broad in bowling style? I feel Siraj can learn from how Broad bowled around the wicket to left-handers. So this is a really interesting one. I've compared these two a lot. Less to do with the antics, more to do with the fact that I don't think either of them are natural bowlers in as much as, actually, maybe that's the wrong way to put it. I think they're both natural bowlers who didn't fully understand what they were doing, right? And so essentially what happens then is when it's not going right, they don't know how to fix it. The advantage that Broad had that Siraj doesn't have is that Broad was really tall and he could just bowl back of the length and bowl dry. And the other advantage that Broad had is because he had batting talent, especially when he was younger and he was a specialist batter, right? He could think like a batter. So he had 2 other gears to go to that Siraj didn't have. But essentially, neither of them really know how to get themselves into that kind of magic form. And it causes them a lot of issues. The thing about how Broad learned to bowl around the wicket, that's not what happened. What happened to Broad is really fascinating. He obviously conventionally had a little bit of outswing. And if you go back to when he destroyed Australia in 09 Ashes, it was with an outswinger. He had lots of success with the outswinger. Around that 2013, 2014, 2015 part, he starts to bowl the wobble ball. Up until that point, he was one of the worst bowlers in the world to left-handers. He starts to bowl the wobble ball and he loses his wrist position and he can't swing the ball anymore, but he can bowl wobble. That losing his wrist position that he had meant that when he came around the wicket to left-handers, he was unplayable. He did not learn how to do it. It kind of happened by accident when he was trying to discover another ball. The wobble ball that Siraj bowls is more that 3/4 length, a 3/4 seam one. And that's a different kind of delivery. So I don't think he's going to be able to copy Broad. They're very different in, one is a skiddier bowler and one is a taller bowler and everything else. But there are some characteristics that they both share. Thank you for the super chats, sir. Rat says, is Alex Carey Travis Head light? I think Alex Carey's a lot more flawed than Travis Head. Although Travis Head still has flaws. It's just that they can be so hard to find. And he hits so many boundaries around them that it doesn't really matter. Alex Carey, to me at the moment, is just in the best form that I've seen him. Probably since the year that he came on the scene when he was opening for the Adelaide Strikers and making runs every single game. In between that, he's played some good innings, but I've never seen him kind of pick up the ball as well as he is at the moment. So I think he's just in really good form. But he's a natural scorer. He's a natural hitter of the ball. He's got a good eye. He's very uncomplicated. But yeah, I don't know if I'd call him Travis Head light. I'm trying to think of who he would be more like. But, he's got that sort of 80s wicketkeeper vibe of there's always energy. There's always something happening about him. But he's also a really good striker of the ball. Max says, is Travis Head the best 3-4 player in the world? I mean, obviously Bumrah's the best 3-format player in the world, but we did the video, Max, on the main channel last test. Was it last test or the end of last test? About Travis Head. when it comes to batters. I don't think you can make a claim there's anyone in the world who's a better 3-format batter than Travis Head. And he'd been in bad form. India brings the best out of his form. He hadn't been in good test form for a while. But even so, I think we all thought that there were more runs due because he had been in good form just before that as well. There really aren't many players who are starring in all three formats, and Travis Head is certainly at the top of that list. Roll says, and what is Ashwin's record in center? Not crazy to play Jadeja over Ashwin, given what Jadeja offers overall. So the Ashwin in center record, I have said this for a long time, is very misleading. And it's partly misleading because Jadeja had a chance to bowl consistently overseas and develop his bowling game in, game out, and work out what he had to do. We all know that if Ashwin had been able to do that as well, that he would be a much better bowler, right? And so what we haven't seen is Ashwin be able to do that as much. So, for instance, Ashwin has, where is he? So in 14 years, he's got 11 matches in Australia, but they're spread out really drastically, right? Whereas Jadeja has, when he's played overseas, quite often played game after game. The issue with playing Ashwin over Jadeja in Gabba has nothing to do, like, you shouldn't even be worrying about little details like that. What you should be looking at the moment is, what do you need? And I think they were probably looking at getting improved batting from Jadeja, assuming that if Ashwin got hit by Head, that there's no problem with playing Jadeja as well. But right at the moment, Jadeja isn't clamping down in the same way. And early on in the match, a lot of Jadeja's best work as a spinner outside of Asia is kind of later on, whereas Ashwin is a constant threat and a constant play that you have to deal with all the way through. So there are elements of that. Also, I think if you look at Ashwin in Australia, that he has been getting significantly better as his career has gone on. You're not expecting any spinner to do particularly brilliantly in Australia, though. Like it's just, no one has done great in their entire career in Australia, especially as a finger spinner. But even the wrist spinners don't do particularly well. It's a difficult place to bowl. You have to bowl spin a little bit differently over there. So if you look at Jadeja and Ashwin, they're both averaging low 40s in Australia. I think that's right. Whereas it's a little bit different overall. When you go through the rest of Jadeja's record. But what we're talking about at the moment is, I think this is a pitch where the extra bounce would have helped. So having one of the other two taller spinners would have helped. And I also think that Head has to take, and Head is the issue at the moment, right? It's a bit like New Zealand and Brook, right? Like, Head is the issue. I just think that would have caused more problems if they'd it doesn't have to be Ashwin. It could have been Washington as well. I think the last two tests were the perfect two. Sydney and Melbourne is when I think Jadeja would have been quite handy. It still might be. Drew says, Ash bowled decently last time against Head, even produced a chance. Yeah, so he had the drop. I think what they were thinking, though, and I haven't talked to anyone in the Indian camp, but I get the feeling that they were thinking, well, he still scored at around 70. He launching back over his head. He didn't look worried by Ashwin, even if you're right. I think there were times when Ashwin bowled well against him. I mean, Ashwin had him dropped, and Jadeja had him dragging one back past the stumps. They both created some sort of, mistakes could have easily on another day led to wickets. Matthews says, Boomer just didn't have a backup today with Nitesh operating 125 to 130 clicks and Akash Deep the same. There wasn't anything for Head or Smith to worry about with 330 runs leaked by the other bowlers. Okay, this is not how I saw this day. I thought Akash bowled really well. I'm not worried about the speed, right? I'm worried about the speed if it's like 125 and with someone like Nitesh. I get your general point there. But I'm not worried about someone bowling 135 kilometers an hour. Akash went past the bat quite a lot. I don't have the control stats in front of me. But I felt that Akash actually produced many chances. He just didn't, unfortunately, get the edge. I was not watching this feeling that it was Bumrah or bust in the way that we have at certain times in this series, right? So, no, I can't agree with this one at all. All right, I'm going to take another quick break, and then we'll be back with more of your questions. My God, where's my Sally at? There it is.
As a cricket journalist, I would travel sometimes up to 200 days a year. I loved watching cricket games. I loved going to new countries. It was an absolute dream. But there was one thing I hated more than anything else about it, and it was this little pin. The thing that I need to change my SIM card in every new country. The absolute worst thing about this pin and SIM cards is when I was traveling to the West Indies, of having to arrive in every new island or country and having to work out if I could still find this pin and then line up and get my SIM card in every single airport. Well, now we have the answer thanks to Sally. They can make it so you never have to worry about this nonsense ever again. They use an eSIM app that once you install once, it is easy, simple, and cheap. Oh, and it works in more than 160 countries. And you can throw these pins away forever, because now you just need to download the Sally app before your trip. And if you do it with our code, Good Areas, you get an exclusive 15% discount on Sally eSIM data plans. So before your next holiday or work trip or any time you have to travel to another country, download the Sally app and use the code Good Areas, or one word, at checkout, and you can travel like a pro with Sally.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions here. Yeah, there we go. So I've just got one, and now I've lost the person who asked it. Where are we? Who did we have? Trevor. We've done the Travis Head one. Triple Stroke. Yeah, Triple Stroke says India gets saved to test. Draw means the World Test Championship chase gets tougher. Yeah, I mean that was always going to be tough. Look, I think this is a very new ball wicket based on what I've seen. So I think there was still a little bit of juice in it, probably because of the rain, the conditions, and everything. So the ball was still doing something until maybe the 45th over. But it looked like to me, once Head and Smith got in, that it just looked like a new ball wicket. And then when the new ball was taken the second time, it suddenly looked a lot harder to bat instantly, right? Like there are some times when you see, especially in Australia, when the ball gets hit around everywhere, the new second ball comes, and it's almost better for the batting team. All right, that was not the case today. So India's going to have to obviously finish off Carey, get them, and perhaps Stark, but certainly Carey, get themselves into a position where they don't lose too many wickets with the new ball, and they have set batters against the ball as it gets a little bit softer and is a little bit easier to play. The issue for them is they're going to be doing that against a big score. And so if they do lose early wickets, then the scoreboard starts to become a bit of an issue. But if I'm right, and this is a little bit easier to bat, let's say between overs, based on what we're looking at the moment, between overs, let's say 25 and 80, because they've shaved off that grass. So a little bit easier to bat than previous Gabba wickets. There's no reason why they can't be scoring 300 to 400 themselves, right? They might still lose too many wickets to the new ball. They might lose a couple of wickets to the second new ball. All these things are possible, but there's also possible that they put on one or two big partnerships in the middle as well. If they do that and they score let's say they score 350 and they're about 100 runs behind, rain then becomes an issue for Australia and how hard Australia want to push. Australia might have to do a bit of a weird declaration at that point. That changes everything. As far as India winning the game, the only way for them to really win the game would be to make 600 and then somehow roll Australia. So that's fairly unlikely based on everything we know of cricket at the Gabba over the last couple of years, because we haven't got to the point where any cracks have opened up yet. And so the wicket is playing fairly consistently at the moment. But we know that that's an opportunity of happening as well, especially if they're taking some of that grass off, right? Like that could happen. But maybe it's been so moist that won't happen. So there's a it's not dead for India at all. Like India have not lost this test match. They've still got a chance of drawing it. Winning it is probably unlikely, partly just as I said before, because of the time. as much as anything. And it also just depends on how much rain comes later. This is the one I want. Drew says, Akash Deep lacks the zip for Australia. He tends to get too predictable, like it was with Aksha. What do you think? Akash Deep produced, in this test match so far, 45 errors from Australian batters. Generally in test cricket, you get a wicket for every 12 errors. I don't think it's a problem with zip. What is interesting is that they have scored off those. So I wonder if a couple of those have gone off for boundaries as well. So he's got edges through the cordons rather than to the cordon, which is another thing worth having a look at. But his bowling today, I'd have to check it compared to, I can bring up both of them, can't I? Where's Bumrah? Oh, now I can't find Bumrah, of course. I'm probably spelling it the way that David Warner says it. Okay. I looked that up by bowlers. So today, Bumrah bowled. Bumrah had 46 errors for 5 wickets, and Akash Deep had 45 errors for no wickets. It's not about zip, man. I thought he bowled well. I thought it's a perfect example of I didn't think he bowled that much worse than Bumrah. Bumrah's Bumrah. Like, if you're comparing anyone to Bumrah, they're going to look silly. I thought Akash bowled 3 really good spells, and 2 decent spells are probably around that as well. And I'm probably also including the spell he bowled last night, if you want that as well, or whenever that was. Yeah, it was last night. No, yesterday morning, wasn't it? It wasn't last night. So, no, I don't think there's a problem with his zip. Yes, he's predictable. Scott Boland's the most predictable bowler in the world, Drew. Josh Hazelwood's really predictable. Pat Cummins is really predictable, right? Lots of really predictable bowlers. Crunk says, Head is someone who's not conventionally talented, but athletically talented. His body is very flexible and strong. He's not really a great athlete, Crunk. I'm not sure I agree with that at all. I think he picks the ball up incredibly early. He is one of those players with almost preternatural. I remember talking to his batting coach, Trent Woodhill, years ago about him when he was struggling. And what Trent was basically saying to him is, just try and cut everything. And Travis Head was like, what do you mean? And he's like, stop trying to play other shots. Like, that's, if you just play the cut shot over and over again, even if they put out a deep point, you're probably still going to get boundaries. You're going to be able to cut it finer. You're going to be able to hit it through cover point. They're never going to be able to protect that boundary to you. And it's going to make it really hard for anyone to bowl to you. And then when they get 2 straight, you can play off your pads. And at that stage, that was when he was getting hunted by right-arm bowlers coming around the wicket. And he was trying to play conventionally. And so it's funny to say your body is very flexible, because if you look at him, I think he's quite strong and nuggety, but I don't think he's not athletically gifted in a way like Alex Carey clearly is a very, Mitchell Marsh. And some of the other Australian players are very naturally gifted. McSweeney looks like someone who's very naturally athletically gifted. What Travis Head looks like is someone more like weirdly enough, the player he kind of reminds me of is David Boone. And it's because he is thicker and he is very good at playing to his spots. And he actually plays like David Boone, except a lot more risky and a lot more attacking version, in that, David Boone was basically trying to get you square of the wicket on offside or leg side. And if it was outside off stump, he would throw everything at it. And if he was on the leg side, Boone would sort of tuck you away. And that's essentially a very similar method to what Head does, but as a left-hander. But on top of that, he has the power and obviously the T20 shots and everything that Boone never developed. I mean, he was quite an attacking player when he was younger, Boone, but when he became good, far more within himself. So it's a different kind of athleticism, I suppose. But when you say not conventionally talented, I think he's very conventionally talented, because his main skill is the ability to pick the ball up really, really early. That's why I think he's very good against fast bowlers. And we're talking about, very fast bowlers, his ability to attack them. I just think he picks the ball up very well. What he's not very good at is organizing all of his shots. So that's why sometimes he will play those shots where he sort of drags the ball back onto his pads or onto his stumps, or sometimes just to the leg side, where he's thinking in his brain, oh, I need to hit this on the offside, I need to hit this on the offside, and he's got himself into a position where he can't hit that ball on the offside, and he ends up dragging it back. And we see sometimes in T20 cricket as well, that sort of, it's almost like he's caught between two shots at times. But yeah, so no, I think there's a lot of convention there. There's probably a lot of batting athleticism, but I don't think there's a lot of natural athleticism. Like if you compare him to someone like McSweeney, who, from the little bits we've seen of McSweeney in the field, he moves like a proper sort of Ricky Ponting, Michael Clark type athlete, a Ravi Jadeja type athlete. Whereas if you watch Travis Head in the field, he doesn't move that way at all. Vignesh says Siraj was not used correctly because of partial injury. Am I right? I don't think he wasn't used correctly. I don't really know what you mean by that, Vignesh, actually. I think the injury was, like, we saw him, grasp at that hamstring a couple of times. I think he had good rhythm today, but wasn't able to put the ball where he wanted to consistently enough. I think his best ball today was really good, but he bowled a lot of very poor balls around that. And because of that, it was too easy to score off him. And that's probably been his issue at times in the series. I don't think his bad ball is particularly... Sorry, I don't think his good balls have been quite as magic as we have seen. But he's bowled very nice deliveries. And then they haven't always stuck around. Isaac says, what are the odds that the game ends in a draw due to weather? Look, I never really worry about these sorts of things. I tell you why I don't. The amount of times I have covered test matches and people have said things like, we won't get any play on days 4 and day 5. It's very rare in international cricket to not get play, right? Like it's not something that happens a lot, and yet it's something that we talk about quite a lot. And so, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert in the Brisbane weather, although, some things I know about the Brisbane weather, or anything like that. So if I look here for Brisbane, and we got oh my god, this is terrible. I'm looking at the Australian website, so I'm trying to just have a look at their suggested I'll do AccuWeather. So we are expecting a little bit of rain. Where are we? So we're expecting rain on all 3 days to come. There are some flood warnings on Monday around Brisbane. And why can't I find Tuesday? Yeah, there's flood warnings around on Monday. And then what's Tuesday got? Tuesday looks like it's got showers. It doesn't say. I don't have. It doesn't seem to have a suggestion of exactly how rainy it will be. But yeah, certainly feels like there's going to be rain around on Tuesday as well. So remember that flood warning sounds terrible, but of all the grounds in the world, like I remember, I'm trying to remember who I covered there, but I covered like a game, and I was staying in Wollongabba, just near the Pineapple Hotel at a friend's place, and it was like Armageddon. Like it was the sort of rain that was like hurts you, and it was violent, and the roads were flooded, and we were like, okay, well that's the end of this test match, and we didn't miss a ball the next day. So it has to be raining at the time, and think about how much rain there was on day 1. And day 2 still had a full amount of play. So it really does have to be almost raining throughout the day, the actual hours of the game. That said, with the amount of rain that I'm looking at here, and I can't find a great website that gives me exact millimeters predicted or anything like that. But the amount of a rain that is predicted over that period, there's the percentage chance of rain is quite high. Like on Tuesday, I'm just having a look, 70% rain, 49% rain, 39%, 20%. That's the first 3 hours of the day's play. If it rains all the way through the morning, And then in the afternoon, it looks like it's a little bit lighter, less chance of rain coming through. If it rains all the way through the morning, you might still get like a good half a day. Monday's the one, based on this one website I'm looking at the moment, which is an issue. But it does really need to be raining during the hours, which isn't the case, of course, of all cricket grounds around the world. They can clear things up quite quickly here. I think most grounds in the world, once it was flooded the way it was on day one, probably would have been called off really early in the day. Whereas the Gabba staff are like, we could probably fix this if it stops. So there's always an element of that at the Gabba. But let's say you take a day out of this test match, right? It suddenly becomes very hard with 2 days play to force a result for Australia. I think we all find it, the way that Australia play their cricket, we find it pretty unlikely that they will try and force a result. Having said that, let's say there's no rain to start tomorrow's play, and they get themselves into a really, really good position. I know they put on 80 really quickly, and then they take 3 or 4 wickets for the first 100 runs. Maybe at that stage, they might feel like they can take slightly more risks from where they are in the game with the amount of time there is left in the game. But I just think it's really hard to be able to push through anything. So they batted quickly today, which partly was helped by Travis Head being out there and then Smith finding form. But that's given them a bit more of a chance to push a result. But I don't know what. Let's just have a look at so the betting market in Test cricket is really interesting because there's a lot of information in the betting markets about. So there's no real great algorithm on the betting markets when it comes to Test cricket. So as in. Yeah, so at the moment, a draw is 1.57 and and Australia is 2.92. So the chances of this being anything, the betting markets have got draw as heavy favorite, and that will be based on people putting a lot of money on with weather radars and everything else. So the one thing that you can trust in the betting markets when it comes to Test cricket is usually the draw price, because that is usually more scientific than anything else, whereas everything else is just going on vibes, right? Of maybe Boomer will get a wicket here or whatever. And so it's a little bit different. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you very much again for coming on over. We'll be back same time tomorrow. We'll be doing the Morning Glory show at lunchtime as well. I'm Jared Kimber. Please like and subscribe and do all those things. And we will see you again very soon for more of this kind of thing. And that is why Nasser Hussain decided to bowl first at the Gabba. And this all, of course, reminds me of Hit Wicket, which is a mobile cricket strategy game that is all about making those tough decisions. Who do you want to send in as an opener when the asking rate is climbing? Do you go for the big hitter or the steady accumulator? Me, I like to throw in someone a little bit unorthodox, a bit of a wild card like the general that keeps the opposition guessing. And what about the bowling attack? Do you unleash your express pace early or hold back for the death overs? I'm always tempted to bring on a mystery spinner in the middle overs and just try and break a partnership. Hit Wicket puts you in the captain's chair. You draft the squad and select the batting order and even decide when to use those game-changing abilities. Do you burn your 2x ability to chase down a big total or save it for a critical moment later on? It's strategic, it's addictive, and it's more nerve-wracking than facing a show-up actor bouncer. Give it a go. Download Hit Wicket and see if you've got the tactical nous to win.